Thank you for joining and welcome at today's third and last webinar of the ProTerra webinar series. And we see that people are still joining, so we'll wait another minute and then we can get started. I hope. Yeah, we see people are still joining. Well, let's get started, not to lose time. So good afternoon again, everyone. Good morning, depending on from where you are joining us. And thank you for your interest and joining today, our third and last webinar of the ProTerra webinar series. My name is Emma van Manen. I'm the Managing Director of the ProTerra Foundation. And in the next hour, we will be talking about circular agri-food systems. We will focus on the role of livestock in sustainable supply chains and on tools to address these challenges. Today, we will start with a very brief introduction about the ProTerra Foundation and updated volumes of 2020. Then we will move on to Frank's presentation from Neveri. He will introduce us some challenges in the feed supply chains, after which Jean-Louis will explain us more about the role of livestock in sustainable supply chains. And we will end today with Helen's presentation about smart combinations and the way we go in soil governance, how to create wonderful matches. But before we jump into the great presentations, I would like to inform you about the logistics of. So you have been put on mute today, so we can avoid any background noise disturbing the presentations. The webinar will be recorded and sent to you after the or even after by using the chat function, and we reserved actually a few minutes for questions at the end of the webinar when we will answer these. If we don't have enough time, don't worry, all the questions will get answered. We will then address these via email or on the phone. Companies face an increasing number of challenges today. The ProTerra standard has been developed to promote social and environmental sustainability through the food and feed supply chains, to support stakeholders in their efforts to continuously improve their day-to-day practices, and to help businesses in engaging and implementing the concept of sustainable development. The ProTerra Foundation is located in the Netherlands. It is an organization that promotes sustainability at all levels of the feed and food supply chains. We own and continuously develop the ProTerra standard, which is a global multi-crop sustainability non-GM standard that covers all crucial areas of responsible supply chains. Let me present you some figures very quickly before we start today's webinar. This slide shows the countries where we are active in. The main countries of destination are located in the European Union, mainly countries such as France, Switzerland, Norway, Germany. And as we are discussing soy today mainly, and that is also our biggest market, the volumes of here you can see the volumes of ProTerra certified soy. This moves around 3 to 3.5 million tons a year. We had 2020, again, a slight increase in volumes despite the difficult supply situation. A significantly growing area, however, is sugarcane, especially in South America. Here you can also see the volumes that we have under certification in the last 3 years, and also verification, which is a kind of a gap assessment, helping companies to improve their practices and get to the level where they can get certified. But not to lose any more time from our great speakers today, I would like to give the floor to Frank. And let's start today's webinar. So thank you, everyone. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you for the opportunity given to Neveri to give some insight into the challenges the feed sector is facing these days with regards to sustainability. You can go to the next slide, of course. Who am I? Well, I'm Frank Gort. I'm a program manager of sustainable innovation at Nivedu, where we represent the Dutch Feed Industry Association. You can go to the next slide. We'll have some just a short brief of what I would like to bring to you this afternoon. So you can see some facts and figures, the core strategy as related to sustainability. Something about circular agriculture, sustainable feed supply chains, and just a few of the challenges, many challenges the feed and feed industry faces, and how to face up to them. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Well, we are with 90 members in the Netherlands, which is a figure which is gradually decreasing as more companies taking over one another, and as we are also being active in a market that is decreasing. We are mainly compound feed manufacturers in the Netherlands, but there are also some premix manufacturers and suppliers of moist feed materials. We do about 1.7 million tons of compound feed, which is also practically the amount which is marketed in the Netherlands. And it's fairly well even spread between the three largest groups of livestock. As you can see, we are a fairly male-based industry. Well, I'm pleased to say that as a trade association, we recently have been joined by two new program managers who are both female, so diversity, at least within our own office, has improved. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Our strategy, well, when I joined in late 2018, we started thinking about our new strategy 2020-25. And this is a strategy which eventually related into four major themes, of which two were strongly related to sustainability. And in a whole, one could say that the strategy focuses on how can we realize a sustainable, climate-friendly, circular agriculture, which remains internationally leading and reinforce competitive innovation and strengthens economic-based through cooperation. And I think it already holds this, conclusion on our strategy holds a lot of the most relevant points in there, which means it is sustainable and climate friendly, being especially tough issue in the Netherlands. We aim to be circular. Competitiveness, because we don't feel that a sustainable system could be reached without a financially sustainable supply chain, feed industry supply chain for us and our partners in that supply chain. And it's something we have to do together. As in more issues regarding sustainability, making our strategy work is something we have to do with partners in our supply chain, as those partners rely on us also to help them to meet their sustainable targets the coming years. And we do that by playing a key role within that supply chain, because for anyone who has ever looked at our strategy knows it's called Feed for Chain Cooperation. And if we go back to the sustainability part of that, that's focused on two main issues. And now you can go to the next slide. Well, the first main issue would be a circular agriculture, and the second one we come to later, a little bit later in this presentation, is sustainable supply chains. We've talked a lot about agriculture because those of you based in the Netherlands will have known that the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture has launched her long-term vision on agriculture, saying she wants a circular agriculture. But she's left that fairly wide open for companies or anyone to decide what would be a circular agriculture. So we looked at it ourselves, and we've brought that circular agriculture back to how we feel about it. And we feel that circular agriculture would actually mean that we try to make the system more circular. And how do we do that? We like to redo any laws outside this food, feed, manure chain. That means that any raw material we use that could help make this chain more circular, reduce the losses of nutrients and emissions from this circular agricultural system. Any change we make that improves closing circles, will make it more circular, make it, to our opinion, more sustainable, and will help also reduce the carbon footprint of the animal-based food we eventually supply. And that means for a lot of people, and at least in the Netherlands, that means that we don't focus on the regional scale of closing these circles. I think the priority is to close the circle. And of course, we like to do that as close, as small a circle in a geographical point of view as possible, but as large as is effectively necessary to close it. You can go to the next slide, thank you. But that's what we do. How do we minimize losses? And we've had some serious losses, both to habit or to legal issues, that made us lose a lot of nutrients. And then we talk about food waste. We talk about processed animal proteins. We talk about more raw materials that have been used for making biofuels. So that's first. That's how do we get more raw materials back into this agricultural system and not being wasted. So we work on trying to help legislation. And as said, we try to source as local as possible, as global as necessary. If using a global raw material means that we help to close a cycle, look at citrus pulp or palm kernel expellers, then we believe it is good to use that raw material. Another important thing is that we try to support our partners to reach their climate goals. As most raw materials that come from as a byproduct or as co-product from industrial or the food industry will have a fairly low carbon footprint and would help those partners to reach their climate goals. And combined with that, of course, this maximum use of co-products is required there. And we try to minimize the use of food-grade raw materials. We prefer not to come into competition with the use of raw materials as food. Next slide, please. So how do we go about that sustainable supply chain? If you look at the circle ones, this is the supply chain. This is a poster we've made for schools in the Netherlands to give them a very nice overview of how we make our compound feed. I think that we need proven and transparent sustainable import. It must be clear that we try to source as local as possible. We invest to public-private cooperation with the Wageningen University and other institutes to promote the use of insects, of algae, of food waste, to help give documentation to lift any possible legal impediment to use any of those materials. So that's one thing. And we support, of course, the use of locally grown feed protein, which is something which is part, of course, of the European, also the national protein strategy plans. But we do believe that we still need those sustainable and transparent imports from third countries to close the gap between the raw material use we have and that what we can source locally. And many people may not be aware, but on a European scale, we are now, I think, approximately at 80% of feed protein is sourced within the EU, being largely forage and cereals, but also a lot of protein crops are grown within the EU. And of course, something which is very relevant, we have to meet public demand, public and market demands. Markets will demand for us to supply supply sustainable raw materials coming from grown locally or growing abroad, like palm or soy. And we face, of course, market demands. There are a lot of market demands relating to the use of local materials, low carbon footprint, and other issues which are in the market at this moment, at this time and age. Go to the next slide, please. So what do? We have to we secure our access to international markets. Given the recent developments in the European Union on the due diligence legislation, especially the vertical one, we have to be transparent and 100% sustainable to claim our access to any international market to raw material. The other thing is, as there are many market demands, that could be animal welfare, it could be organic farming, it could be non-GMO, or any type of market element. It's not up to us to decide what a market actually wants, but what we can do and what we must do is we have to be transparent about the economic and the environmental impact of all the impacts a specific choice in a specific market can have. Because our partners further up in the food chain, in retail and the food industry, might not always know what the effect, the real impact is, or they might not always know all impacts related to a specific choice for a specific consumer proposition. So we have to help them, we have to inform them. Well, I think I mentioned the use of alternative protein sources like insects, food waste, and processed animal protein. And of course, one thing we must keep doing is to continue and intensify our efforts in the well-known chains of soy and palm. We've made progress there, but more progress is needed. And it would be very unwise to say, well, we must stop there and focus only on our local protein supply. And then the fifth there, which is still a relevant one, which is not my focus, but mainly the focus of my colleague. We can in no way compromise on feed, food safety, animal health and welfare. These are prerequisites which have to be met. You can go to the next slide, thank you. So I think many of you might know these figures from the IDH report, European Soy Report. The new one this week will be released, I think, within a few weeks. So we still see, and as I talked about, we would like to become, and Europe would like to become, of course, less dependent on third country high risk, high deforestation or conversion risk commodities. But as you see, the total global market of soy is very large. It's also mainly an animal feed market. We're very aware of that. But the local, a lot of the global supply of soy is still not very sustainable. And that means to drive further sustainable, further and more sustainable soy supply within the whole world, I think we here in Europe and in the Netherlands, we should remain focused also on those high risk markets. It's very easy. It would be a very easy choice to go for markets and raw materials which have a low risk and to avoid any high risk area. But avoiding high risk area would not improve the sustainability of the soy supply chain. We have to keep a foot on the ground in regions like South America, with regard to soy, or for palm, in regions like in Southeast Asia. It would be a terrible loss to the people there who have invested all those years in sustainable supply chain to say here in Europe, well, it's been a nice effort, but it's too much of a fuss. We'll switch to less low risk areas. We have to be present there to work there on sustainable supply chains. Next slide, please. So this is, we are in this whole due diligence discussion, which is now running in the EU. We are very aware that we hope the EU focuses on progress made instead of making the demand so high for companies that will face the risk of avoidance, because avoidance would not help global sustainable supply chains. The next slide, please. So if you look at another challenge, and it will be present in more countries than the Netherlands, especially at the Paris Climate Agreement and how this has been formulated for any one country. Within the Netherlands, various animal supply chains have had their targets on the carbon footprint of their production chain. And we see here just a few figures of to what extent raw materials, and especially soy, have an impact on carbon footprint. On your left-hand side, you see, for example, the chart for the carbon footprint for soy from some various regions, and where the light blue bar represents the land use change part. As land use change is, of course, calculated within carbon footprinting for over 20 years. And most of you know that most of the sustainable soy systems we have in this world have not been in place for 20 years. So that means that soy coming from these areas will have a fairly high carbon footprint related to land use change. That you, of course, will see in the right bar if you compare the carbon footprint of soy to some of the other raw materials used in animal feed. There are some which even have a carbon footprint of almost zero, as carbon footprint is, of course, mostly related to the main product being beer or sugar. And if you look at that and you keep in mind, you can go to the next slide, by the way. And if you keep in mind that a large portion of the carbon footprint of animal-based products is actually related to feed, I think it's up to about 85-90% in poultry and pig, and up to 60% in dairy cattle. That means we face also large challenges for companies and supply chain partners along the chain trying to reduce their carbon footprint. And that means we need raw materials with a low carbon footprint. So raw material makes a high influence, and so this could also stimulate supply chains to avoid high-risk deforestation area, because any deforestation, any raw material being deforested after, in this case, being 2021 in 2001, will give us a very high carbon footprint of that raw material and thus of our animal-based product. But I think on the one hand, this land use change related carbon footprint, which is so high in soil and deforestation risk commodities, will expire after 20 years. And on the other hand, it will, for some farmers already now, but especially in the future, it will give farmers, local farmers in high-risk area that are already producing sustainable for a longer period, it will give them more options to have a bonus for the raw material-based supply. And so people that already meet criteria, being for part of the land they are the arable land they are producing crops, could already benefit from carbon credits and have a stronger benefit than only a regular credit of a supply chain model or scheme to be sold. So I think that's one. And on the other hand, the whole environmental footprint issue is, of course, a very relevant one, but it focuses only on the environmental sustainable effects. And if you look at the SDGs, there are, of course, a lot more relevant sustainability targets to be met. in those areas. Land grabbing, the rights of indigenous people, living wage, and other issues. So we have to have a broader view at the footprint of feed materials than only the environmental footprint of those materials. Next slide, please. And that brings me also to the last slide, is how to face up these challenges. First of all, as is in our strategy, I believe we have to do that by cooperating worldwide and with all supply chain partners and NGOs. Then I firmly believe that it's better to focus together on what has been achieved and what we're doing right, than to try and focus on what's wrong. Focusing on things that are good and trying to multiply good examples is, in my opinion, a far better way to move forward. That doesn't mean that what's going wrong should be put under the table or moved under the carpet, as we say. Be open about where you are, what you stand, and what failures have been made, because only in that way we can move forward. As I said, it's a multi-level transition made both on various places and levels within the supply chain, but also on various geographical or political levels. It's an effort we have to make in Europe within our European Trade Association, FEVAC, with other partners, but also with various partners in the Netherlands, but also partners again in South America. And on the other end, as fast sustainability, as in quality, where I worked for 25 years, is a beautiful thing of many colors, and it requires an integrated approach to prevent very negative trade-offs. And I think that's it, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you so much for explaining us more about the challenges companies face in the regional and global markets and in their supply chains. And now we will continue with Jean-Louis, who will explain us more about the role of livestock in the sustainable supply chain.
Okay, Miss. So good afternoon or good morning to everyone. So this presentation is about the role of livestock in a sustainable supply chain. And we will consider two aspects: the role of livestock in circularity, which is in continuity to the Frank previous speech. And then we will consider how we can reduce the shadow of livestock and how we can increase the benefits of livestock farming. So the next slide, please. Just a few words about livestock in Europe. Livestock farming is really a crucial importance for many European regions. Livestock are present in almost all regions in Europe, more or less, but in many regions. 60% of European farms hold animals, notably in the eastern countries. The livestock sector contributes substantially to the European economy and represent more or less 40% of the total agricultural activity. As you can see on the map, there is a big difference in intensity of production of livestock according to the different regions in Europe when we consider the number of livestock units per hectares, where we have red color is very intensive system with very dense animal production. And in this red area, which represents 1/3 of the total livestock in Europe, but in a small area, only 10% of agricultural area in Europe. So very high animal density. In some other region, we have more grassland. And in this region, we can consider that we have some quite intensive grazing system, for example, in Ireland. So it is a green and red dot points. And more extensive system, as we can see in Spain, in the center of France, Massif Central, or in other regions. So very, very diverse system. But remember that on the mean, we have 1 livestock unit per hectare at the level of European agricultural area. So very dense region, some region with very low level of animal or not animal at all, but on the mean, we are more or less at 1 livestock unit per hectare. The next slide, please. So First part of the presentation is livestock as a part of circular and sustainable supply chain. So next, please. Okay, so we came from what we call the Green Revolution, which is since the Second World War. This revolution brought enormous productivity and production efficiency gains. And effort for the livestock sector has focused on maximizing the production per animals, the number of piglet per sow, the amount of milk per cow, and so on, and to reduce the cost. Productivity gains indeed were tremendous and very high, thanks to genetic improvement of the animals, development of new inventory practice, high quality feed, improvement of animal health. The second aspect, which is very important and perhaps more important than the intensity of production, is the specialization of the farm, and worse, the specialization of the region. And this is also a decrease in the number of farms. So some regions became highly specialized in intensive livestock farming, while others were specialized in crop production. This evolution was favored by an era of cheap energy and was largely based on a linear way of thinking. We have resources, we use resources for production system, we have production system to have products, we use product and we produce waste. It is a linear way of thinking without considering the amount of the origin of resource. And this finally lead to a number of impacts. So some negative impacts are directly linked to livestock system, high level of nitrogen output, greenhouse gas emission, welfare issue, antibiotic use, and so on. But some others are also linked to the crop system with a monoculture or very simple rotation, high use of mineral fertilizer, high use of pesticides. So, and finally, agriculture and especially the livestock system has lose part of its legitimacy, and the society is now calling for agricultural to change. And this is also in line with the Green Deal, the farm to fork strategy, the biodiversity strategy, which provide very ambitious objectives in terms of carbon footprint, reduce use of pesticide, of mineral fertilizer, development of organic farming, and so on. So next slide, please. So the conversion of the agricultural sector is required, and we need to change the interplay between the sector. We need to reconnect plant, animal, and don't forget soils. And this offers opportunities to maintain our food system within the planetary boundaries. By strengthening the connection between the livestock production, the cropping system, and the soil at different levels, I mean farm, regional scales, we can develop synergy. And the next slide. So the synergy, here we see that the expected benefits are efficient use of scarcely renewable resources, mainly energy, food sovereignty, protein autonomy, recycling biomass between sectors to avoid waste, adaptation to climate change with more diverse rotation, for example, low use of pesticides and mineral fertilizer, greenhouse gas mitigation, carbon sequestration in soil, closing nutrient sink, restoration of biodiversity, restoration of soil fertility. To avoid this reconnecting, indeed, provide new responsibility for the livestock sector, but also new opportunities. Livestock are recycling by essence. They recycle food from non-edible biomass into high quality food. They also recycle manure and to avoid mineral fertilizer. And so livestock also make easier crop diversification thanks to their ability to use a broad diversity of crops. And more diverse rotation will facilitate biological control of plant pest, will increase nitrogen and protein self-sufficiency, and contribute to soil quality. So livestock farming is very important for this circularity. But we have several difficulties. See the next slide, please. And these difficulties is that we know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So we need to find local solution, and we need to find new balance between crop, livestock, according to the region in Europe. More livestock in some region, less livestock in other region. The system approach is required to shift from a focus on efficiency of a single product. We worked in the past on the maximum yield of wheat per hectare, maximum yield of milk per dairy cows. We need to think about the efficiency of the system, how many protein and energy we can produce by 1 hectare of land. This is totally different. We need to consider the governance of the system, the socio-economic arrangement and capacity building, which are all key issues for a sustainable recycling of biomass in agricultural system. And we need also to deal with the numerous production, economic and policy interdependency. The next slide. So keep this slide, please. It's too long. The next slide, please. So to achieve this, the livestock sector need to tackle four sectors. The first is sectors linked to resource, I mean climate, biodiversity, and natural resources. And I will focus on this point for the next part of the presentation. But we not forget that we need also to consider the One Health approach, animal health and welfare. We need also to consider the food and nutrition security. And we need also to consider the role of livestock in livelihood and economic growth in the different regions in Europe. But we will focus this afternoon on climate, biodiversity, and natural resource. The next slide, please. So what can we do to mitigate the shadow of livestock and to maximize the positive contribution? Everybody knows this kind of result, and study using the life cycle analysis have consistently shown the impact of livestock. I think that we have more than 100 publications on this topic. Animal-based products have high impact, especially when we consider the carbon footprint. And per unit of protein, ruminant has a much higher impact compared to monogastric, and monogastric higher impact than plant-based product. This is well known. This impact of the lowest, and indeed the impact of the lowest impact animal product exceed average impact of the plant protein, perhaps except for the use of water. This vision is probably too simplistic, and we will see later at this point. But it reminds us that we need to find a way to improve the sustainability of the livestock farming system. So next slide, please. Considering the greenhouse gas emission, the contribution of livestock to climate change was highlighted several years ago by the FAO, which reports the livestock long shadow, and globally the sector is responsible for 14% of all greenhouse gas of human origin. Considering the Europe level, the European Environmental Agency published this kind of result showing that agriculture is responsible for 10% of greenhouse gas emission at European level, from which 7% are livestock, so 70% of total agricultural sector, industry 38%, transport 21%, tertiary sector 11%. If we consider the kind of greenhouse gas, it's clear that enteric methane from ruminant is very important greenhouse gas for 44% of total greenhouse gas emission. But we have also methane from manure, and in total, manure and enteric is more than 50% of total greenhouse gas at European agricultural level. But we don't forget that we have also 36% or 37% from nitrous oxide. So these two gases are very, very important for the livestock sector. We stress a lot about methane, but sometimes we forget a little bit N2O. So next slide, please. If we consider greenhouse gas mitigation option, there is a lot of possible solutions. So the graph first on the left part of the slide show that we have big variation between system and within system. For example, for bovine meat, we see that the variation is a ratio of 1.5. So we have margin to make progress. And we can consider the emission from the rumen and emission from the feed sectors. If we consider the way of progress, we can consider improving herd efficiency, We can also consider circularity, and we can consider nature-based solution. Considering the herd efficiency, we can increase efficiency by genotyping low-emitting animals, but this way of progress is not so clear because we need to take care not to select animals with lower cellulose digestion efficiency. So what are the trade-offs between emission of methane and cellulose efficiency, digestion of cellulose efficiency? We need to improve feed quality or use feed additive, which can be very efficient to limit methane emission, especially polyunsaturated fatty acid or nitric oxide derivatives. We can improve herd management and animal health. And here, clearly, the age at first calving and the replacement rate show potential to reduce enteric methane emission by modifying the number of dairy cow and replacement heifers in the herd for a given level of milk production. We can also develop some precision feeding strategy which can help to reduce emission. Considering circularity, the most important is probably a smart use of manure. I mean, collection of manure, storage of manure, application of manure on the field, and this allows to reduce methane emission. Better use of manure to replace synthetic mineral fertilizer offer additional way of reducing also N2O and CO2 emission, because the production of mineral fertilizer require a lot of energy and fossil energy consumption. We also need to avoid to produce crop only for feed, and we need to give priority to dual purpose crop for food and feed. And we need to cover the soil with cover crop, and this cover crop, which are very efficient to avoid soil erosion to produce organic matter, can also be used as animal feed. Concerning the nature-based solution, we can increase the use of protein crops or protein forages, forage legumes especially, in grassland or as pure crop of lucerne, for example, and we have a lot of advantage of this protein. It is clearly protein autonomy, but it is also a far reduction of N2O emission because N-fixing by the plant doesn't produce N2O. We can produce also biogas, which is another area of progress, so producing green energy, or we can increase also the soil carbon sequestration with proper management of grassland and developing agroforestry. So next slide. So the margin of progress is probably around, if we are a little bit optimistic, 40% reduction for 2050. Okay. The last point is about greenhouse gas mitigation is soil carbon sequestration. Here I show the result of a big survey in France and a literature survey, which show that we can quantify soil carbon dynamics and possible way of additional carbon sequestration in soil. If we consider the current carbon sequestration in the blue bar, you see that cropland is still losing carbon compared to grassland, which still increase the soil carbon content, especially when it is grazing. If we consider additional carbon sequestration, it appears that the cropland, where the current carbon stock is very low, have some potential to increase carbon storage, especially with no-till techniques or direct weeding, but the insertion of cover crop is much more efficient. Above all, which is the most efficient, is the introduction of rotational grassland into crop rotation, which can have a very positive contribution, as well as using organic fertilizer, organic from manure. So these 2 points, last 2 points, clearly show that well-managed livestock farming can have a very positive contribution to carbon sequestration in soil. So next slide. When it comes to nitrogen and local impact of the livestock system, clearly the specialization of the farm and the region put large problem. On the map, you see that when the color go to purple or red, it's a large excess of nitrogen in input or nitrate losses or ammonia emission. And you see that it is the case in Denmark, Netherlands, west part of France, Flanders, Po Valley, and so on. So all the region where we have intensive livestock farming. And at the far of the story, more than 80% of nitrogen of agricultural origin present in the European aquatic environment is linked to the livestock, and 90% of nitrogen emission is from livestock. Okay, so we are short in time. So we have a potential of reduction, 60% reduction by using lower feed protein input, smart use of manure, and biorefinery manure to produce a mineral fertilizer from manures. Okay. So next slide. So just to see what happened in terms of ammonia emission from the manure, we can manage manure at housing, storage, and spreading. And you see on the slide where we have some room to maneuver in the different places. And in total, more than 60% of ammonia emission can be reduced. Okay. Moving to the biodiversity, so the role of livestock in biodiversity is really very complex. Livestock contribute to biodiversity loss through different drivers, notably habitat change, pollution, climate change, and you see that in at all levels we can have positive aspect, which is in green, or negative contribution, which is in red. Typically, for habitat change, the role of livestock in deforestation is a very negative aspect, but at landscape, the role of livestock in building landscape connectivity is very positive. Okay. And here is to give some details about the role of livestock on biodiversity. It's clear that deforestation is a major cause of biodiversity, and Europe imports approximately, according to the European Commission, 10% of the global embodied deforestation, and it's claimed from soya, meat, palm oil, cocoa, rubber, timber. But in the other side, the livestock, and notably ruminant, can produce biodiversity with a lot of forages, multi-species sward, and diversification of land use, the preservation of landscape, habitat, and ecological corridors. Okay, the next slide. Do livestock use resources inefficiently? It's clear. Generally, when we consider the efficiency of the livestock sector, we consider the plant, which is the amount of plant which is required to produce 1 kg of animal protein. And using this unit, the efficiency is low. But if we consider that livestock recycle biomass protein that is not directly usable for human food to produce food of high nutritional quality, the figure is slightly different or even completely different. The feed food competition indeed does in fact concern those protein of plant origin that are edible as human food but are actually consumed by the animal. If we use the second part of the graph, you see that the efficiency is much higher, especially for ruminant, and some grassland-based ruminant systems are indeed net producer of protein and not in competition with human food. It is also the case for non-ruminant, where they are used and feed with co-product. So livestock farming is more efficient, but it is often claimed. The same figure is also true for the use of land. Livestock use 70% of agricultural land, but half of this area is marginal land. This can be only used by herbivores, ruminants, or horses. We have part of this land which is used by rotational grassland, temporary grassland, but this part can be very important to produce ecosystem services in plain, and part of the crop is used by livestock, and it is the part which is really in competition with human food. At world level, it is 30% of the cropping area which is used by livestock. In Europe, because we have a more intensive system, it is approximately 50%. Okay, just to give another example and flavor of what livestock can do. On the left side, it is a result of a large survey in France showing the use of pesticides in different farming systems. And you see that in the mixed farming system, the number of treatment per year is 2.3, which is far lower than the number of treatment in specialized cropping system, 3.7. So again, circularity between livestock and the cropping system can produce very positive result, even for the pesticide use. On the center of the slide, you see that grassland soil is very interesting because they're much rich in organic matter. It reduces erosion because the soil is covered permanently, and we have much more biological activity in the soil in terms of the mass of invertebrate, for example. And if we consider the biological activity of the soil, you see that from the crop system to the permanent grassland, we have an increased activity in the ProTerras, for example, which is an indicator showing that the higher is the proportion of grassland in the territories, the higher is soil activity. Okay. Just to finish with LCA, I say that LCA is sometimes too simplistic. Indeed, when we use LCA, we just look at for the food production from an agro-ecosystem, but we forget that the agro-ecosystem also produces something about soil, about biodiversity, about carbon accumulation in soil. So some critical aspects for long-term sustainability are not considered, and considering only food give advantage in the intensive farming system and give low and no advantage at all for organic system, for example. And as I explained before, because LCA is a linear approach of agriculture, we don't consider very well the role of livestock to recycle biomass and protein into the food chain. So we need to make progress in life cycle analysis to better analyze the farming system. To conclude, so the next slide, please. So we need to think twice, and we need to develop a systematic thinking. We need to move away from a simplistic plant versus animal opposition and do not step into a simple protein transition. The shadow of livestock can be mitigated and counterbalanced, but we need to rethink the interplay between the crop and the livestock sector. Circularity provides a new ambition for the challenge for the livestock. Animals are clearly a recycler by nature. We forget this some time ago, but it's a low conversion of biomass, production of manure, which is an organic fertilizer, a nature-based organic fertilizer, and they can provide a range of societal goods and services. So next, the last slide, so the condition of success for this reconnecting of livestock. We need integrated solution. Livestock system must be transformed to fulfill their role. There is no doubt on this. We forget on what I stress on one aspect, but I also say that we need to work on animal health, on animal food quality, on animal and rural vitality. We need a diversity of livestock production system, which is essential. And we need to articulate local and global scale production of food and production of immaterial function. And we need to develop more accurate model to track progress. Thank you. The last slide is just to illustrate. Okay, so that last slide. Okay, so just to say that when we produce livestock, we produce sometimes something else than only food. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insights of this very interesting, complex topic. Thank you. Helen.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Helen van den Hoemberg. I work for IUCN National Committee of the Netherlands. And my presentation is called Match Smart Combinations as the Way to Go in Soy Governance. I come from this angle of nature conservation and also of soy as, let's say, a bulk product used for intensive livestock farming. So I do refer to the former speaker for many aspects that also come into play for soy or livestock and land use. The challenge in soy, you could say, is making scale while assuring quality, and that is meaning in terms of production. I mean, it has made scale, as we all know. It is a huge commodity, but also in terms of sustainability efforts, we have to make more scale with sustainability efforts for soy, but without losing the quality, such as of integrated standards when we reach out to the bulk and to full physical supply chains. And I'll make my point clear as we go along. Next, please. Simply said, there could be three main factors in the wheel of good governance of soy from a nature conservation perspective, and that is resource efficiency. Well, I think the former speaker has said a lot about that. Resource efficiency, chain responsibility, and landscape governance, let's say, as three important aspects. Next, please. Next, please. So in resource efficiency, just some elements to underline some elements. Feed efficiency, the efficiency of use of feed by livestock, either grazing directly on soy, as this cow is doing, or let's say through the import or and use of other types of feed, including soy, far away from the field. Land use efficiency, of course, efficient soy and livestock production systems, sometimes in combination, very often, let's say, separated. It's important to use the land efficiently while protecting nature, of course, from our perspective, never without that last element. So that means that you can increase efficiency of land use, but it only makes sense from a conservation perspective if you also have strong safeguards on the farm and off farm for protecting that nature. Next slide, please. So challenges in resource efficiency in consumption. One is to avoid food waste, as Frank has rightly mentioned as well. But also in our case, for example, in the Netherlands, reducing protein consumption a little bit because we consume much too much. We love our dairy, of course, and other products. And go for a protein transition towards a more balanced human diet. As the former speaker has rightly said, there are, let's say, absolutely rational ways of why using land for livestock. It has a function to play, and some land also is not very suitable for human food production. But overall, you could say that much land that is used for feed is also very suitable for food. In the Netherlands, in the program on circular transition, the ambition is to go from 60 to 40% division of animal to plant protein through 50 and 50%. To reverse the trend and say it's 40 to 60% in 2050. And that's a long way to go, of course, because of our habits and the way that we consume. Next slide, please. Well, back to feed and the chain responsibility. The trend now is to say, well, deforestation-free or conversion-free should go beyond certification. We have to make more scale in the total physical value chain, with overall policies and also with regulations such as at the level of the EU, and making use of monitoring technologies, be it the blockchain or satellite monitoring, etc. And that is, it's absolutely right to say so, that we have to reach out to the full value chain. Roughly spoken, you could say that 3% is certified deforestation-free worldwide, and 19% European soy use in 2018 was certified deforestation-free according to deforestation-free and FAFAC sourcing guidelines compliant standards. So that's a technical definition, but it gives an indication of where we are in those terms. So in Europe, you could say, well, we're progressing, and probably this year the European Soy Monitor will show a bit more progress again, and in 2020. Yet there is still a huge percentage, of course, to capture. But, and I think that's a central element in much of my advocacy towards financial institutions or companies or the European Union, is that we should build on what we've learned. And that is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as we say in Dutch and in English, and to use the knowledge also of standards such as ProTerra's or RTRS or Donor Soy or others, how to deal with sustainability at a farm level with integrated criteria, social and environmental, also good agricultural practices and labor issues, or how to deal with surrounding communities, etc. So I do think that it's also very important to make scale in broadening their application. Next, please. So we've dealt very shortly with resource efficiency and chain responsibility, and landscape governance, of course, has its huge challenges. Next, please. Just to mention a few. Taking and keeping farmers on board in the sustainability journey across a jurisdiction or across commodities. So in soil landscapes, often also livestock is found, or cotton or corn, etc. So how to reach out to those different commodities and to farmers being at very different levels, of course, sometimes of their sustainability journey, if they are on it at all. So sometimes, of course, it is also a challenge to make them know the law and apply the law, etc., let alone have them certified. So conservation and its connectivity. For example, a standard can ask for 10% conservation on the farm, but how to go beyond the isolated patches? If from a landscape perspective, you need connectivity between areas to make them vital for specific species, but also for the biome, for the ecosystems themselves. Huge challenge there to promote the government role, to take responsibility for overall legal compliance and talking to the farmers to produce sustainably and supporting them, not in the least to do so. Or green finance, sometimes, coming from different sources, private sector, but also public sector. Just in a very, very short bird's eye view on just one page. Of course, we can have whole webinars about these type of challenges. And I know that IDH is also on board today, and they're trying to do so in some landscape programs. Much comes down in the soy value chain to set the bar and raise the floor. It's a one-liner that I sometimes use to explain that we have to set the bar of value chain requirements, and we can set a high bar, but we also should raise the floor of production landscape governance. Without it, it will not work to mitigate climate change, to come to conservation or to social justice. And I really do believe this is a collective search that we're in right now, a big global experiment that we're trying to learn from each other how to go about this. Next, please. But meanwhile, and rightly, so we have to deal with public pressure, and I use the hammer in this case sometimes because it sometimes a bit scandal driven, sometimes a bit one issue. We do need that pressure, but it is not always very productive. So when the call is to clean up the value chain, make it deforestation and conversion free, apply human rights due diligence, or reduce the carbon, or even, let's say, abolish carbon footprint. Those pressures sometimes come in isolation, and they do not look at the small steps and the learning that is taking place in the sector and across, multiple stakeholders to learn and improve the system. And even if it's very important, public pressures, and I also do argue for legislation at the EU to have a level playing field, but the sustainable solutions that we're searching for should not mean steps back in the application of quality criteria. And as Frank has rightly said, the abandonment of risk landscapes that rather are helped by a reaching hand than by saying, we have nothing to do with you anymore. Next, please. So within that, I think we should strengthen the baby in the bathwater, learn how to swim while reaching for the green grail that you see there in the water, in the wild waters of the search for sustainability. And so I think this green ball is a node between the different routes towards sustainability. Next, please. For example, if we talk about resource efficiency, yes, but still sustainable production is needed, whatever the value chain, wherever it comes from. So if it's vegan or vegetarian or animal protein, you would need integrated criteria and social and environmental to be applied. In value chain responsibility, self-evidently. Standards can be examples and also tools for control in mandatory settings, such as within the EU, when mandatory criteria are designed. They can also take, let's say, quality standards as an example, and also in the toolbox for their control, while the responsibility remains at the company to apply them. And also in physical supply chains, they have a role to play. In landscape governance, this is also sometimes forgotten. You know, when you reach out to broader constituencies locally that are sometimes very far away from certification, but then still standards can be used as a guidance for improvement. The principles and criteria can be guidance for improvement and ultimately also as a proof of compliance. For example, there are examples of landscape programs between certification standards and landscape, types of programs with built capacities of farmers and that reach out to local government. So match. I think matching is the way to go. As an example, next slide, please. I'd like to draw the attention to the Collaborative Soy Initiative that is doing matchmaking between insights and initiatives and tools to reach 100% conversion-free sustainable soy over time worldwide. So a huge ambition by meta meetings, a working group, webinars and an info hub in development, and meta meetings, I mean, between different soy initiatives that are struggling with some of the challenges that I mentioned. And I look forward to working with ProTerra on a webinar in June on 2nd, the volatility of soy and its effect on sustainability. So thank you for your attention, and let's try to match efforts to real progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We could hear some solutions how to tackle these challenges, because it is crucial to see the solutions and positive developments as well. Also, instead of only focusing on the problems, as many cases today, we hear only negative, devilized news about soy, for example. I think the presenters explained very well the role also of livestock in the supply chain and focusing on solution, positive development and collaboration. So thank you all for this. We have some questions, however, we are running out of time. So I will address the first ones, and then the remaining ones we promise to answer you via email. So the first one is for Jean-Louis from Anton. It is on the topic of competition for land use between animal feed and food production. You hinted at 50% for EU. I understand the data isn't perhaps fully clear yet, but could you elaborate on what this could mean? 50% of the land used to grow crops for feed could maybe be used to grow crops for direct food purposes. So practically what he is asking is what is exactly the 50% is referring to? Okay.
It's a quite difficult question, because this kind of evaluation is very difficult. We have done the work in France, and we consider that for the different crops, wheat, barley, maize, soya, some part, rapeseed, and so on, we calculate which part of the crop we produce in France or we import is used for livestock feed, or is used for food production, or is used for export. In France, we use exactly 25% of the cereal grain we produce, but we are big exporters, and it means that we have some grain which is exported in other countries in Europe, and this grain probably is used for animal feed. We don't know exactly. We have 2 or 3 papers showing that on the roof, the area used by cropping area used to feed livestock is between 50 to 60%. But indeed, it is difficult to quantify very precisely, because in the paper, we don't know exactly which part of byproduct is considered and how they are considered, which part of grain which are produced but not able to be used as food. For example, low protein wheat. In France, the part of the wheat we produce is not rich enough in protein to produce bread. So we use in livestock, and in this case, livestock is not in competition. It just use a poor product to produce meat and milk, or eggs, it is the case of hen. So it's very difficult to have a precise evaluation of this value, but I claim that most often the data which are commonly circulate in media are far too wide.
Okay, thank you. And the very last question, and then we really have to close, and thank you all for your interest and the very good questions as well. A recent report from Wageningen made a suggestion for land reorganization in the Netherlands, based on soil conditions linked towards arable or husbandry usage, as well as a difference between intensive and organic. How realistic do you believe this plan is to be for the Netherlands? Are similar non-governmental plans made in other EU countries?
So I can respond. I don't know exactly the situation in Netherlands. And, I just know that the price of land is much higher in Netherlands than in some other countries, as in France, for example. So the solution is probably totally different. One of the solutions which is often claimed is to use good land to produce grain and cereals and so on, and marginal land to produce mainly livestock. But doing this, we forget that livestock is also able to produce manure, and that manure can be a good fertilizer. So we need to re-equilibrate. For example, in France, and I think it could be the same for, as far as I know, Netherlands, in some region there is too many livestock, and it's very difficult to manage the excess of nitrogen, the excess of phosphorus. In some other region, there is no more animals and probably too much crop, with some problem on soil organic matter content, on soil erosion, and so on. So I'm really think that we need to re-equilibrate the number of livestock units per hectares of land in different places in Europe. For me, it's a key issue. It's very difficult because we know why livestock are concentrated in some region. There is some economy of scale, there is some economy of agglomeration, and we know why livestock disappear in some other region. But it is very important to find new equilibrium between this between livestock and crop production in many areas in Europe. We can achieve this by transferring livestock production. We can also imagine to transfer some product extract for manure. It's another solution. The question then is it efficient in terms of carbon footprint? So we need a global evaluation of this system. In France, we partly develop organic farming in land where we cannot produce very intensively, indeed.
And if we look at the Netherlands, Helen or Frank, how realistic do you believe this plan to be for the Netherlands? What Wageningen suggests for land reorganization?
Frank, because I'm not so much into that. Not so much.
I've heard of the plan. I haven't read it, but it's not the first. It has been mentioned earlier in the Netherlands to make a strict distinction between grounds which are very good for crop production for human use and others. So make a clear distinction between highly intensive organized farming, because highly intensified farming in general would also mean it gives those farmers opportunities to invest also when measured if it's high intensity livestock farming included in a mixed farming system, made a necessary investment to tackle any most of the environmental risks involved, like nitrogen and so on. So it's an option, but I wonder if it's feasible, because of course, as we said, the prices in the Netherlands for ground and make the trade-off. As you know, as some people might know, in the Netherlands, there are, given the problems in housing, for example, there are many claims made on land in the Netherlands. And looking at the point that there's a large amount of land is, of course, in the hand of farmers. That means that we're going towards a new equilibrium in land use, being a nature inclusive farming, very intense farming, and building to give people a home. So I think that's a third factor which becomes going to play a very specific role within the Netherlands. And I must say, at this moment in time, I do not know how that new equilibrium will be looking at.
You run out of time, but I added 30 seconds. Just the last question for Helen. How can we supply the biological value of the animal protein? Because for human alimentation, it is critical more than vegetal protein.
Well, I think, yeah, as said, it's about a balanced diet, not about, being necessarily totally vegan. What I suggested, for the transition in the Netherlands. But I think that many vegetarians and veganists are convinced that it is as healthy to live such a life than necessarily with animal protein. So I think that, I'm not a health specialist, but I think that with the right combinations of, the rice and bean stuff, etc., that a lot can be also gained from plant protein. But again, it's about a balance and not necessarily about an abolishment of total animal protein. And it does play a role in circular land use systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. As we mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be shared and the remaining remaining questions will be answered. Thank you so much, and let's keep in touch, and all of you stay safe. Thank you.